I never intended to investigate giants. That was never part of my plan. My original research focused entirely on architectural anomalies scattered across the American Midwest. I was studying old buildings from the 19th century, structures that seemed far too advanced for their time. Massive stone courthouses, railway stations, libraries, and government halls built with a level of precision that did not match the technological limitations we are taught about in history books. Their ceilings were unusually high. Their staircases were wide and steep. Their acoustics worked perfectly without modern engineering tools. Their stonework fit together so tightly that even today, engineers struggle to explain how it was achieved. These buildings were supposed to be the product of primitive machinery and limited knowledge. Yet they looked as if they had been designed with advanced understanding. That contradiction was what first drew me in. I wanted to know how people in the 1800s managed to build on such a scale, with such accuracy, in such a short time. For months, I searched through city archives, old blueprints, municipal records, and forgotten engineering journals. Most of it was routine. But occasionally I would find strange gaps, missing documents, incomplete reports, construction timelines that made no sense. Projects that should have taken decades were supposedly finished in just a few years. Materials that should have been impossible to transport were somehow delivered without explanation. Then, while browsing through a digital archive of 19th century newspapers, I came across something unexpected. It was a small article published in 1883 in a local Missouri Gazette. It was not featured on the front page. It was not sensational. It was buried among farming updates and weather reports. At first glance it seemed insignificant, but one line stopped me cold. Skeleton of a giant 12 feet tall, discovered in western Missouri. I reread it several times, convinced I had misunderstood, but the words were clear. The article was not written like a legend or a rumor. It was factual, direct, almost casual. According to the report, a farmer named John Hannon had noticed bones protruding from the side of a ravine on his property. Years of rainfall had slowly eroded the soil, exposing something buried beneath. At first he assumed they were animal remains, but when he examined them more closely he realized they were human. He began digging. Over several days he carefully removed layers of earth. What he uncovered was a complete human skeleton, preserved in remarkable condition. Every major bone was intact. The skull, ribs, spine, arms, and legs were all present, and they were enormous. The article listed exact measurements. The skull measured 40 inches in circumference. The distance from the jaw to the top of the head was 15 inches. The ribs were nearly 4 feet long. The thigh bones measured 30 inches. Each bone was thick, heavy, and perfectly shaped. There were no signs of deformation, no evidence of disease, no visible weakness. It was, according to the description, a normal human skeleton scaled up to 12 feet. One detail in particular haunted me. The rib cage was so large that an adult man could crawl inside it, turn around, and come back out without difficulty. This was not poetic language. It was not meant to impress. It was a simple physical observation, included as part of the report. What struck me most was the tone of the article. There was no excitement, no dramatic flair, no exaggerated claims. It read like a routine account of an unusual discovery, as if such things were not entirely unheard of. John Hannon did not seek attention. He did not organize exhibitions. He did not charge admission. He did not contact reporters. The newspaper learned of the discovery through local channels and published the information without embellishment. After that, Hannon returned to his farm and continued his life. And then the story ended. There were no follow-up articles, no scientific examinations, no museum displays, no preserved photographs, no academic references, no public debates. The skeleton vanished. Not physically alone, but historically. It disappeared from records, from archives, from memory. When I searched for it in modern archaeological databases, I found nothing. No mention, no classification, no rejection, no explanation. It was as if the discovery had never existed. Yet it had been printed. It had been documented. It had been measured. Someone had read it. Someone had recorded it. And at some point, someone had decided that it would no longer matter. That moment changed everything for me. What began as an investigation into old buildings had suddenly become a search for something far larger, a hidden layer of history that had been quietly erased. And the Missouri skeleton was only the beginning. As I continued digging deeper into the Missouri discovery, one question refused to leave my mind. Why was there no official response? If the skeleton had been fake, scientists would have exposed it. If it had been misidentified, experts would have corrected the record. If it had been exaggerated, newspapers would have issued clarifications. That is how knowledge normally works. Claims are challenged. Evidence is examined. Conclusions are debated. But in this case, nothing happened. No arguments. No investigations. No denials. Just silence. That silence forced me to widen my search. I stopped focusing only on Missouri and began collecting similar reports from other regions. I searched through digitized newspapers, university archives, personal journals, museum newsletters, and shipping records from the 19th and early 20th centuries. What I found was disturbing. Again and again, I encountered stories that followed the same structure. A discovery made during routine work. A farmer plowing a field. A miner digging a tunnel. A railway crew cutting through a hillside. A construction team laying foundations. Bones were found. They were identified as human. They were unusually large. Measurements were taken. Witnesses were named. Local newspapers reported the findings. And then representatives from universities or museums arrived. The remains were packed, shipped, transferred, and never mentioned again. In Nevada, miners at Lovelock Cave reported finding tall skeletons with reddish hair. In California, Catalina Island excavations uncovered skeletons far larger than average, some with unusual dental features. In Ireland, railway workers discovered massive bones during excavation. In France, researchers published papers describing extremely tall individuals based on fossil remains. Each case had documentation. Each had witnesses. Each had professional involvement. And each ended in disappearance. I tried to locate these specimens in modern museum collections. I searched digital catalogs from major institutions. I reviewed inventory systems. I examined accession records. What I found was strange. There were gaps. Sequences of catalog numbers that skipped over entire ranges. Entries marked as lost, unavailable, or reclassified without explanation. Shipments that were acknowledged in correspondence but never recorded as received. Transfers that had departure dates but no arrival confirmations. This was not random chaos. Museums are obsessive about documentation. Even broken fragments are labeled, stored, and tracked. Even insignificant objects receive identification numbers. Yet these giant remains had no trace. It was as if they had been deliberately removed from institutional memory. At the same time, I began noticing something else. The architecture I had originally been studying now seemed connected to these discoveries. Across America and Europe, buildings constructed in the late 19th century shared unusual features. Government buildings, train stations, libraries, and exhibition halls were built on a scale that exceeded practical needs. Doorways towered over visitors. Ceilings stretched far beyond what was necessary for ventilation. Staircases were wide and deep, with steps that felt awkward for average human movement. Windows were positioned unusually high. Everything seemed designed for taller occupants. At first, historians explained this as monumental style or symbolic grandeur. But the more I observed, the less convincing that sounded. Many of these buildings were not meant to impress. They were functional spaces, offices, courts, waiting halls, storage facilities. Why build them so large? Why waste resources? Why design for empty space? Then there were the acoustics. Many of these old structures had perfect sound distribution. A speaker standing at one end could be heard clearly across vast halls without amplification. Modern architects require complex modeling to achieve this. Yet these buildings did it naturally. There were also underground systems. Beneath major cities lay networks of tunnels, water channels, pressure chambers, and ventilation systems whose original purposes were poorly understood. Some seemed over-engineered. Others appeared to operate on principles no longer taught. It was as if these cities were built on top of older systems. Inherited systems. Systems we no longer fully understood. Indigenous oral histories added another layer of meaning. Many Native American traditions spoke of large beings who lived in the land before modern tribes. The Paiute told stories of red-haired giants in Nevada. Cherokee legends mentioned powerful tall people. Irish folklore spoke of stone giants. Similar stories appeared in Asia, Africa, and South America. Academics dismissed these as myths. But myths often preserve memory when physical evidence is gone. When bones are removed, only stories remain. And stories are easy to ignore. What disturbed me most was the coordination implied in all this. Museums in different countries. Universities with independent administrations. Government agencies with separate authority. Yet all behaved the same way. All denied possession. All lacked records. All avoided discussion. No international agreement existed. No public directive was issued. Yet everyone followed the same pattern. This suggested something deeper than coincidence. It suggested an unspoken rule. An understanding passed quietly among institutions. Certain discoveries were not to be pursued. Certain questions were not to be asked. Certain evidence was not to be preserved. Not through open censorship, but through quiet omission. Through neglect that was too consistent to be accidental. Through silence that was too widespread to be natural. And slowly I realized that what I was uncovering was not just about bones. It was about control over history itself. By the time I reached this stage of my research, I no longer believed that the disappearance of giant remains was accidental. Too many patterns repeated. Too many records vanished in the same way. Too many institutions behaved with the same silence. What once looked like scattered mysteries now formed a single, connected system of erasure. The most disturbing part was not that mistakes had been made. Mistakes happen in every field. Records are lost. Specimens are damaged. Files are misplaced. But mistakes do not repeat themselves with mathematical precision across continents and decades. This was something else. It was controlled absence. A history defined not by what survived, but by what had been removed. I began comparing how science reacted to other extraordinary discoveries. When rare fossils were found, international teams were assembled. When ancient DNA was recovered, laboratories competed to analyze it. When new human ancestors were identified, debates filled journals for years. Discovery created discussion. Discussion created knowledge. Knowledge reshaped history. But with giant remains, there was no discussion at all. It was as if the scientific process had been deliberately interrupted. Imagine if today someone uncovered multiple human skeletons twice the normal height, perfectly preserved and anatomically sound. The discovery would dominate global media. Governments would intervene. Research institutions would compete for access. Every field, biology, genetics, archaeology, medicine, would be involved. Careers would be built on it. Yet in the past, when similar discoveries were reported repeatedly, nothing happened. No headlines. No funding. No research programs. No public exhibitions. Nothing. Instead, there was denial. If questioned, institutions claimed the remains never existed. If confronted with newspaper evidence, they dismissed it as unreliable. If shown shipping records, they called them incomplete. If pressed further, they stopped responding. Silence became the official position. I searched for any serious academic attempt to investigate these reports. Surely someone, somewhere, had tried to challenge the narrative. Surely a professor, a researcher, a graduate student had questioned the gaps. But even that was missing. There were no major papers refuting the evidence. No comprehensive studies analyzing the claims. No conferences discussing the phenomenon. It was as if the topic itself was forbidden. Not formally banned. Simply ignored. And in academia, being ignored is often more powerful than being opposed. The Missouri skeleton illustrates this perfectly. Geological descriptions suggested that the remains were deeply embedded. They were not recent burials. They were ancient. They had settled into layers of earth formed over centuries or millennia. Yet no proper excavation was conducted. No dating tests. No preservation efforts. No scientific documentation. The remains vanished before anyone could study them. We are told that gigantism explains everything. But modern medical cases of gigantism are well documented. They involve fragile bones, joint problems, heart strain, and distorted proportions. People with extreme height rarely live long, and their skeletons show clear signs of stress. The Missouri skeleton showed none of that. It was described as balanced, strong, proportional. We are told it was probably a hoax. But hoaxes require motivation, money, fame, attention. John Hannon gained none of these. He did not tour the skeleton. He did not profit. He did not seek recognition. He simply reported what he found. We are told the newspapers exaggerated, but hundreds of newspapers across different countries reported similar findings using similar language and measurements. That level of coincidence is statistically absurd, which leaves only one explanation. The reports were real, the discoveries were genuine, and the evidence was removed. Why? Because it challenged the foundation of modern history. If giants existed even in small numbers, it would force us to reconsider evolution, adaptation, and environmental conditions. It would require re-examining architecture, engineering, and social organization. It would raise questions about how such beings lived, worked, and built. It would destabilize established theories. It would undermine authority. It would invite chaos into carefully controlled narratives. Institutions exist to preserve knowledge, but they also exist to protect stability. Sometimes stability matters more than truth. If a discovery threatens to rewrite everything, it becomes dangerous. Not physically, intellectually, politically, culturally. So instead of confronting it, it is erased. Not loudly, quietly. Files are misplaced. Specimens are lost. Catalogs are revised. References disappear. And after a generation passes, no one remembers. The erasure continues today. Not through censorship, through indifference, through ridicule, through labeling uncomfortable questions as conspiracies, through teaching simplified versions of history, through discouraging independent investigation. Most people never question what is missing. They only accept what remains. But absence can be evidence. Missing pages tell stories. Erased records leave shadows. Forgotten discoveries leave echoes. The Missouri skeleton, the Lovelock remains, the Catalina Island giants, the European finds, the Death Valley mummies, they form a pattern too precise to ignore. They point toward a past more complex than we are taught. A past that included forgotten knowledge, lost technologies, and possibly beings who no longer exist. We may never recover their bones. They may have been destroyed, hidden, or locked away forever. But their absence remains, and it speaks. It tells us that history is not only written by winners. It is edited by institutions, filtered by authorities, shaped by what is allowed to survive. What happened to John Hannon's discovery? Where did it go? Who decided it was unworthy of study? Who chose silence over knowledge? We do not know. And perhaps that is the point. Because as long as we do not know, the official story remains intact, unchallenged, comfortable, incomplete. And the truth, whatever it may be, remains buried beneath layers of forgotten earth and carefully maintained silence.